So this last week, as I was reading through some comments, I received this one comment from this girl who said, would you be willing to make any type of content around dating and maybe advice or tips or thoughts on it? And first off, let me say I really appreciate when any of you will give exact topics you would like to see videos on, because the hardest part for me with creating videos is actually coming up with the topic. So if you have any ideas for future videos or anything you would specifically like to see or specifically like to watch, maybe comment those down below in this video. And even if you don't have any ideas, maybe go through and read those and thumbs up the ones that you would find the most interesting, and maybe I can cover some of them in future videos. And I think that would be really fun. And it's so helpful knowing what type of videos are desirable, because I have tons of ideas of things I would love to talk about or make videos on, but at the end of the day, I don't know how interesting they would be to other people. So with that being said, thank you for giving me this idea. And I sat down, came up with some ideas. I'm very lucky. I have one brother in particular that's really in the dating stage of life, and I have two other brothers who are fast approaching that age. And so this is definitely a topic my family discusses a ton, which is really fun. So first off, I think I need to mention that I'm a Christian and my husband is as well. And so of course that really greatly affects the way that we approach dating to begin with. However, even if you're not a Christian, I really think some of these different thoughts and views and ideas can be really, really beneficial within your dating relationship. And I'm going to be sharing a lot of practical reasons why I think these pieces of advice would hopefully benefit you, because those can be great motivators as to why maybe some of these things are important to implement into your dating life. My first number one tip for dating is to get the hard topics out of the way on the first or second date. And in my mind, some of the hardest topics to discuss, or some of the most important ones to discuss, are probably your sexual history or sexual past. Obviously, you don't have to dive into tons and tons of detail, but I do think you need to be very clear and very honest. And so I really encourage you to talk about that, as awkward as it is. First dates are always awkward anyway, so why not make them a bit more awkward? Another thing is kind of your vision or what you picture your future looking like. I think this is super important, because for myself as a woman, I had an idea of the type of man that I knew I could respect and admire and look up to, and the type of lifestyle to some extent that I wanted to live. And so it's much easier to support my husband having married someone who has very similar views as my own in these areas. Another thing that I think is super important is discussing your views on family. Do you want to have kids? Do you want to adopt? Do you not want to have kids? All of those type of things, I think to some extent, are really important to get out of the way up front. Now, there's lots of different reasons for this, but the two biggest reasons I can think of is that I have seen a lot of people get into a relationship, become very attached to each other, become very in love with each other, and then 6 months or a year down the road, something crazy big comes up, and maybe they realize they're not the most compatible for each other, or maybe they realize there's been some dishonesty in the relationship, but by that time, your feelings are so invested, it's really hard to either call off the relationship or get married and later on kind of regret some decisions that you made. And so talking about these things up front and kind of clearing out the waters as far as this is the direction of life that I see myself going, this is the type of family that I picture myself having, this is my past, these are mistakes that I've made. I think getting those things out of the way is really, really beneficial. The second thing though is I think it is much easier to be honest typically at the start. And what I mean by that is 6 months down the road or a year down the road, when you guys are talking about getting married and planning a wedding, if there are certain things you haven't been honest and upfront with right away, it is going to be so much harder to be honest upfront about them now, because you want this relationship to work out and you have so much time invested into this person. And so also, I think by being honest and upfront at the starting of the relationship, it builds a lot of trust that carries on through your relationship. And so those are just a couple of reasons why I think it's really important, as awkward as it can be and as uncomfortable as it can be at times, to really get those hard topics out of the way up front so you know if this is even the type of person you would be interested in pursuing long-term in a relationship. All right, tip number 2. Probably if you're a non-Christian, you're gonna roll your eyes at this because it doesn't make a lot of sense, but I'm gonna give you some practical reasons why I still think it's really important. And that is to not get physical too fast. And I know this is extremely hard. I was certainly not perfect in this area at all in our relationship while we were dating. But there are some reasons why I think it's really important. And so my husband and I obviously decided as Christians we're going to save ourselves for our future spouse until we're married. But that being said, we were extremely attracted to each other. We held hands right away. We were semi-physical. And a big reason why I would caution women in particular about becoming physically affectionate too soon is that one of the things it does is it can really blur your vision. Because I've talked to other friends who've experienced the same thing. But I found I'd never really been in a physical relationship with anyone before. All of a sudden, having these amazing fireworks with this person, being so attracted to this person, receiving so much affection from this person, it made me confused at times about how I actually felt about getting married. And so there was actually at one point in our relationship where I was gonna break things off because I just felt so confused inside about the feelings that I had in this relationship. And so I think by being physical too soon, it really can complicate you really discovering, is this someone that I want to marry? Where are these deep, deep rooted feelings of love actually coming from? And so I think it can make it more confusing to the women in particular. So that's one reason. Another reason is that as Christians, obviously we wanted to wait until we were married to have sex. And the earlier on you start physical affection, the harder it gets to wait. Another thing that I think waiting longer to get physical with a person does that's so beneficial to women in particular is that you really weed out a lot of trashy guys. And you really get rid of a lot of guys who would not be good potential long-term partners. So that's another thing. There are so many things. I just wanted to cover a couple besides the typical Christian answers that I think are extremely important, but I think there are really good reasons why God commands those things in the first place. So those are just a couple. So these are some boundaries that we set, or some ideas that I've heard that I think are really wise. Especially farther on in the relationship, once we were serious, we were never at each other's houses by ourselves, which I think made things a lot easier, obviously. We tried not to stay out super late at night by ourselves. We took lots of dates. We did tons of things by ourselves together, which I think is actually really good. But we did have some boundaries as far as how late at night we were out usually and where we would be. So we weren't putting ourselves in situations a lot where it was just the two of us in a building together alone. I also had a really close relationship with my mom. I still do. And so I was constantly able and wanting to kind of tell her, hey, this is what I'm struggling with right now. What do you think about this? Do you think this is okay? And it's just really nice when you have a close relationship with someone who's willing to tell you, I think you guys are going too far, or I wouldn't advise that, or this is what I've learned from my experience. That's really beneficial to have someone like that in your life that you're close enough to, that you can talk to about these things. And then they in return are willing to actually tell you back whether or not they think what you're doing is wise. Another thing is to be very upfront right away at the beginning of the relationship, before you're overly involved or overly in love with each other, about certain set boundaries. We also reevaluated often our relationship and where we were, how we were feeling about it. One of us would come to the other one and say, hey, I think I went too far, I apologize, or hey, I think we need to change this. And so we did that quite often in our relationship while we were dating as well, to make sure that we maintained some boundaries and clear communication. This is another idea that I heard, and I didn't hear this till after we were married, but I thought it was such a fun idea. This husband and wife shared that while they were dating, she had this empty jar and then this jar full of pink beads, and he had an empty jar and a jar full of blue beads. And every time they had a successfully pure date with each other, she would put a pink bead into her jar and he would put a blue bead into his. And then on their wedding day, they actually poured the beads together like some people do with layers of sand. They did it with layers of their beads. And I thought that was a really cool idea and just a fun little way to stay inspired, because boy, it gets so hard to wait. it's so hard to wait. That's all I'm gonna say. Number 3 that I think is super important, and I know there can be controversy on this, but it's to be really upfront and open and honest about how you feel in the relationship. This was something I loved about my husband, and something that really made him stand out amongst other guys was that he was not afraid to be vulnerable and just put his feelings out there and say, hey, this is how I feel. I'm interested. I would like this relationship to be potentially leading to marriage. I'm not interested in playing games. He was super upfront and open with me, and I absolutely love that. And that really stood out to me because so often nowadays I feel like everyone's playing these stupid dating games and they're not willing to be honest. And I also think it can be really unfair to the other person if they think you're at a totally different point in the relationship than you actually are. And so I think a good way to kind of eliminate some of that miscommunication or misunderstanding is just to be upfront and honest the entire way through the relationship about how you're feeling, as much as is possible. Okay, so I think I mentioned this at the starting of this video, but one of my brothers in particular, he's 21, he's kind of in the dating season right now. And so he's constantly coming back and telling me all these maddening stories about these girls that he's gone on dates with, and sharing with me different things he's found as the guy to be super frustrating about a lot of girls out there. So I thought, what would be better than sharing these things with you all so that you know to be sure that you're not doing them. So I just have a couple of things. He always says, girls do not know how to ask good questions anymore. No one knows how to continue a conversation or even just ask a question back. And so this being said, maybe a little tip for you if you're not naturally gifted at communication or at carrying on a conversation is just to ahead of time, even before a date, maybe write out some exact, specific, detailed, deep questions you can ask that person. And I honestly think it can show a great deal of how serious a person actually is about you or about the relationship, dependent on what they want to talk about and what they want to learn about from you. And so I used to actually, when I was dating my husband, and I still do this to this day because I'm still dating my husband, I'll look up sometimes really good questions to ask my husband that I've never thought to ask him before, and on a date I'll pull it out and I'll ask him one, and it's super fun. And I do that to this day, and we've been married for almost 4 years. And so think of some good questions. Think of some things that are actually interesting that you would actually like to know about that person. And I think that can make for a lot better and a lot deeper and meaningful conversations. And there are guys actually out there, like my brother, who wants to have deeper conversations with girls, but they will not ask good questions. The next thing, which is tip number 5, that he has said again and again, is that so many girls are not interesting. And of course, some of this is personal preference of what you find interesting. But I do think in our modern age, we're so focused on social media and on being on our phones all the time and texting that maybe we don't have as many hobbies or as many interests as people used to. And so I know for him, he has complained before that girls are just, there's not a lot of really interesting girls out there that really intrigue him. And I know from my dad and from my husband, they've both told me before that it's really cool when you see a girl who has hobbies and passions and is out doing stuff with her life and is interested in things and is building a future, rather than maybe just sitting at home waiting for a husband to show up at her door, or just really someone who is not going anywhere in their life. And so I think that's really important. And I kind of wanted to close up this video following this train of thought, and that is, whether you're in a really serious relationship or you're single right now, really focusing on improving yourself is only going to benefit your future, whether or not you're going to be in a relationship in the next 6 months. And so look for skills that you want to improve in. Look for hobbies that you want to build. Look for dreams that you have that you want to pursue, or callings that you feel God's put on your life that you want to learn about, or people that you want to invest in. And whether or not you get married this next year, you're going to be better off because of that, and you'll have not wasted your time just waiting. You'll be happy no matter where you are next year because of these things that you've advanced and grown in. So those are just a few things today that I thought I would share, some things that came to mind that I think can be really important. I hope this video was helpful, gave you some ideas. Once again, remember, if you have any type of video ideas, please comment them down below. And I will see you, my lovely ladies, hopefully next week in my next video. So, bye!